This is something I'm so looking forward to. It's another chapter of my amazing life.
The King of Keys, Sir Elton John. With a career spanning 5 decades, Elton John has mixed the pop and rock styles to become one of the biggest musical icons of the 20th century.
On January 24th, 2018, Elton announced that he was finally actually retiring.
I've had a most amazing career. And, you know, you have to say, enough's enough. And what's the most important thing in one's life now? And it's the children. They've changed our lives.
At the start of the 90s, John confessed the personal cost of extravagance, drug abuse, depression, bulimia, and revealed his dramatic fight to regain control of his personal life.
I've been given a second chance at living a decent life. I made a complete hash of the first one. And I think the chance I've been given again, not many people get that in life.
The great thing about a film like Rocketman is Elton John was so breathtakingly honest about himself.
You can't help people who don't want to help themselves. I've learned that as an addict, and I'm 28 years clean and sober. When people told me, when I was using, that I was doing the wrong thing, I was so angry, and I just told them to go away, or actually stronger language than that.
For whatever else you want to say about Elton John, he is a genius at what he does.
He really was just a regular person. He was in the right place at the right time with the right talent.
As much as I have been a very famous person, I think I'm also quite grounded in a way, and I don't really talk about my success a lot. And certainly I don't bring it home. And it was just lovely to think, God, what an amazing life I've had. And it's still continuing.
Elton John has a career like none other, and to truly gauge the magnitude of his unique journey, we have to start from the beginning. Singer, songwriter, composer, and icon, Elton John was born Reginald Kenneth Dwight on March 25, 1947, in Middlesex, England.
Elton John was born with the unfortunate, perhaps, name of Reginald Dwight. He changed it to Elton John, and I think we all kind of understand why. In the movie Rocketman, there's a kind of a funny scene where somebody says to him, Reginald, that's my grandfather's name. And it's true, it just didn't have the same kind of cachet and coolness. So he very quickly realized if he was gonna be a big, famous pop star, he was gonna have to come up with a different moniker, and he did.
I think the whole story of Elton John is based on the fact that he's a normal person. In fact, he may be the most anonymous face in the crowd that's ever been plucked out of the crowd to be a big-time superstar, household name. I don't think there's anyone in the music industry that could claim they've gone a further distance than Elton John. By that I mean, John Lennon and Paul McCartney always had fairy dust sprinkled on them. Even as teenagers, people were saying, John Lennon, what a memorable guy and all that. And so on and so forth. You know, Bob Dylan was never sort of one of the guys, a normal person, and so on and so forth for whomever, male or female, black or white, whatever. But Elton John really was just, according to everything you've read and I've ever heard and the people I've spoken to in my years in the industry, just a really sweet, normal guy.
From a very early age, it was clear he had a real passion for music, and much to his family's surprise, he taught himself to play piano when he was just 4 years old. The childhood he spent with his piano keys was faithfully recreated for the John Lewis 2018 Christmas commercial in the UK.
It may be quite simple, but now that it's done, I hope you don't mind.
Kid playing Elton John in this commercial sits down and plays really well. You can see the mother and the grandmother going, and I'm sure that's really what happened with Elton John. He was just another kid in the suburbs, but one whose dream came true. He pursued it really, really hard. You know, he went for it, our Elton did, but also fate stepped in and scooped down and grabbed the guy, because he really was just a regular person. But he was in the right place at the right time with the right talent.
How wonderful life is while you're in the world.
You know, when Elton changed his name, he also kind of reinvented himself. The costumes, the headdresses, the makeup, the glasses, all of this became part of his persona. At a time when, you know, this is pre-Lady Gaga, this is transgender awareness, this is pre-men dressing up in costume. This was the beginning of something. Elton was breaking all kinds of barriers about the idea that people had about men in makeup, about sexuality, about being gay, about not conforming to a stereotype. He broke a lot of barriers and he got a lot of criticism for it, but he continued kind of in a fearless way of being true to who he wanted to be on stage.
Elton John's one of those guys that thought about it before he did it. By that mean, he knew when he was Reg Dwight that Reg Dwight wasn't going to cut it. He would have known about the Larry Parnes acts where, you know, Billy Fury wasn't his real name, and Georgie Fame was born Clive Powell. I mean, none of these guys had Johnny Gentle. No one's born Johnny Gentle. These are in the same way no one's born Muddy Waters and no one's born Howlin' Wolf. You need a name that's striking. And Elton John knew that Reg Dwight just really wasn't going to cut it. So he was playing in a number of unsuccessful bands. He was a noted piano player, and everyone knew him. And he played on a lot of those records that say the big hits of 1968, the big hits of 1969, where they can't afford to actually have, say, the Beatles or Marmalade or Love Sculpture or Fleetwood Mac. What they do is they have a bunch of session guys mimic as close as they can Fleetwood Mac's Albatross, a big hit in '69, or the Beatles' Something, a big hit in '69. And they record an album, then they put a sexy girl on the cover, and there would be a budget LP. And Elton John played piano in a lot of those sessions.
Beyoncé has talked often about the fact that she has a persona called Sasha, who is who she is when she's on stage. In the case of Elton John, I feel that very much so Elton became his stage persona, but he never slipped out of that mask. He never slipped out of that persona. In fact, if you called him Reg, even in his daily life, somebody he's known for years, if they slipped and called him Reg, he would be absolutely furious. He became Elton professionally, but he also became Elton the diva personally. Those barriers and lines between Reggie Dwight and Elton John were gone forever. He was Elton John, and the stage diva didn't go back to being Reggie Dwight when he went home. He was Elton 24/7.
Responding to an ad in a music trade weekly in 1967, Elton John auditioned for Liberty Records. The Scouts liked his performance, but not his material. Lyricist Bernie Taupin had also replied to the Liberty ad, and one of the Scouts gave Elton a stack of Taupin's lyrics. 6 months later, the two met and started writing together. John and Taupin took their songs to music publisher Dick James, who hired them as house writers for £10 a week. Elton John and Bernie Taupin would prove to be a formidable music team. Taupin would write lyrics and deliver a bundle to Elton every few weeks. Without changing a word and only rarely consulting Taupin, John would fit tunes to the phrases. For nearly 2 years, they wrote easy listening tunes for Dick James to peddle to singers. Seeking advice from another music producer, Steve Brown, Elton John and Bernie Taupin started writing rockier songs. The first was the single "I've Been Loving You," produced by former bluesology guitarist Caleb Quaye. The records didn't sell, and John and Taupin enlisted Gus Dudgeon to produce a follow-up album. The self-titled album, Elton John, established the formula for subsequent albums: gospel, chorded rockers, and poignant ballads.
Elton John had started off in the States. I don't even think the album Empty Sky was released in the States. I don't think. When the album Elton John came out, no one would have guessed what he was to become. He has an album out called Elton John, just eponymously named after himself. It had a very somber cover. It looks sort of like Randy Newman in the shadows, and one might expect some satirical, very serious State of the Union kind of songs, a la Randy Newman, looking at the cover. And I distinctly remember, as a young man back then, one of my friends said, as the currency of the day was. I've heard this fantastic new album. I said, who's it by? And he said, Elton John. That's how early in the day it was for Elton John's career. He was called Elton John. And I thought the guy's name was E-T-O-N as well, like the school. So the guy, my friend bought the album, and it was very somber relative to the guy that just a few years later would walk on stage at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles in a sequined Dodgers baseball outfit. But he looked very serious. It was a wonderful album. It had the signature song, Your Song, which he and Bernie Taupin wrote, which I cannot believe.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
It's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. I'm not one of those who can easily hide. I don't have much money, but boy, if I did, I'd buy a big house where we both could live.
As much as I'd like to, he must be tired of playing that by now, because it may well be the one song everyone thinks of when they think of Elton John. Yes, there's Candle in the Wind or whatever, but I think Your Song really made him in the States, as did. He played a legendary, and that's a word that's said in the record industry way more than it should be. He played a legendary residency at a place called the Troubadour in Los Angeles. When the Troubadour, as it's said in LA, when I got to Los Angeles in '77, as it was said in LA, when Elton John started that 1970 residency, no one other than the hip cognoscendi in the record industry knew who he was. And after his 4 nights or whatever it was at the Troubadour, everybody in the record industry not only knew who he was on both coasts, because the word was out. He's packing it in, he's got the audience in the palm of his hand each night. But everyone in the audience knew he was going to be big. I mean, be it a punter who got a ticket because they knew the first album early on, or someone like Neil Diamond who was at the shows, or a David Geffen or whomever. Everyone knew this is going to go nationwide. This is going to crack. And I'm saying just on a handful of shows at the Troubadour, word was out. He later toured America pretty extensively. I saw him. It was a terrific band with Nigel Olsson, and in the very early days. But he was made early on. What he did in the year 1970 was a total big bang for his career. Earth-shattering boom!
John made his historical American debut at the Troubadour in Los Angeles in August 1970. Kicking over his piano bench Jerry Lee Lewis style and performing handstands on the keyboards, John left the critics raving. Your Song carried the album to the top 10 of the American charts, and with extensive radio play, sold even faster and reached number 5. By the middle of 1971, 2 more albums had been released. A live set taped from a New York radio broadcast in November 1970, and the soundtrack to the film Friends, written 3 years earlier. Elton John was the first act since the Beatles to have 4 albums in the American top 10 simultaneously. Madman Across the Water came out in October 1971, boasting hits Leave On and Tiny Dancer. The album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was released in 1973.
Elton John was already a pretty megastar by, say, 74, 75. I mean, people knew who he was. But the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road set, being an expanded set, there's something about a larger, lengthier album that has an impact. If you look at the careers of the quote-unquote biggies, many people say Rolling Stones are defined by Exile on Main Street, Beatles are defined by the White Album, Bob Dylan's defined by Blonde on Blonde. And Goodbye Yellow Brick Road had so many songs on it that were played on the radio in the United States. We're talking almost saturation level. The only thing I can really tell my European friends that is comparable is in about 18 months when the Bee Gees did Saturday Night Fever, and that was ubiquitous on American radio stations, AM and FM. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road sealed the deal. Yes, he was already a multi-platinum guy, and he was pretty much a superstar, but after Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Candle in the Wind and, you know, Benny and the Jets and all that stuff, you're talking a guy that is a household name. And I don't mean to you or me or the people around us here in London, the hipsters. I mean to people like my mother and father. After Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, God bless you, old mom, they knew who Elton John was, which is kind of extraordinary because they're completely out of the rock or pop world, completely out, but everyone knew who he was. I mean, he was on magazine covers and, you know, business magazine covers that they only put somebody on if they were making a lot of money. I mean, he was way beyond just being a Rolling Stone cover act. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was really the one. And I mean, Don't Let the Sun Go Down. I mean, there were so many iconic songs that you just think, wow.
In the mid-70s, John's concerts filled arenas and stadiums worldwide. He was the hottest act in rock and roll. After recording Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, the first album ever to enter the charts at #1, John overhauled his band. New members were brought in. With his new band in place, John introduced the lineup before a crowd of 75,000 people at London's Wembley Stadium in the summer of 1975.
When he did the album Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, that really summed it up for me because that was a reference to who and what they were. Elton John was the guy going on stage in sequined outfits, in the memorable, he had a number of spectacles that were memorable spectacles in themselves. And he had one pair of glasses I've always loved that had windshield wipers like a car, and he had all these crazy pink satin outfits and so on and so forth. He is Captain Fantastic. The Brown Dirt Cowboy is Bernie Taupin. Like many Brits of a certain era, he was raised on a lot of American culture in the 50s and so forth. And he always sort of wanted to be a cowboy, hence the album title, Captain Fantastic, Elton John, and the Brown Dirt Cowboy being Bernie Taupin. Bernie Taupin to this day has, I hope I can name the state, Bernie, a ranch, a farm, a working one in Arizona, where he goes out with a cowboy hat and there's steers and there's horses and all that monkey business. So it's worked out incredibly well for both of them because Bernie Taupin realized that he had some great lyrics. It was an okay melodicist, but that he wasn't a front man, and he wasn't a great singer, and that he didn't really have the desire that Elton John, aka Reg Dwight, had to go out there in front of the public. I mean, Bernie Taupin is a wonderful guy, but he's not the glorious extrovert that Elton John becomes when he walks on stage. So their marriage was perfect. And from the get-go, they started doing really good work. If you listen to Elton's very earliest stuff, Empty Sky, it's not quite there yet. Then the Elton John album, uh-oh, we got something going on, that's where Your Song comes from. Then I think the second one is, of course, Tumbleweed Connection, which is Bernie Taupin at his most obsessed with Americana and the band and country and western music and Bob Dylan and Robbie Robertson and all that kind of crowd. And it was just, it shows a wonderful meeting of the minds and a wonderful team, but what it shows to me is, again, Elton John's wonderful and pragmatic and practical realization, I need to do A, B, C to get to D. And that meeting Bernie Taupin might have been A through L or M. I mean, that was a huge step forward.
After the monumental gig at Wembley Stadium, Elton John's frenetic recording pace began to slow down, and he performed less often. A live album, Here and There, had been recorded in 1974. John's biggest hit in 1976 was the #1 Kiki D duet, a single from the downbeat Blue Moves album.
In 1976, Elton's song Don't Go Breaking My Heart went straight to #1. It was that famous duet with Kiki D, which you can basically hear at every single karaoke night around the world, guaranteed. The song is so catchy and it's so pop gold, and it just everybody went crazy for it. The song was played across the world on the radio stations. It was one of his first big, huge breakout hits.
was flown to New York, and the great excitement was Thanksgiving of '77, I believe. And the great excitement was people saying, remember 3 years ago when John Lennon walked on stage at Elton John? And I've seen some very grainy footage, and they do whatever gets you through the night. The bet was, John Lennon said, I want you to play on this track, Elton. I need a piano player on my album, Walls and Bridges. I need a piano player I'd like you to play. And Elton John was a big Beatles fan. Duh. I mean, many people are, but particularly he's the perfect guy to be impressed by the Beatles. Let's remember when he was Reginald Dwight, right? Hadn't changed his name yet, had been famous. The Beatles were gods. So he was thrilled to, work with Lennon. And he told Lennon in the studio on the Walls and Bridges album, I will play on this song on one condition. And Lennon said, what's that? And the condition is, if it gets to #1, you have to come sing it on stage with me at a concert. And Lennon said later, he thought, well, I might have a big hit, but I didn't really think it would get to #1 in America.
In November 1977, John announced he was retiring from performing. He secluded himself in any of his 3 mansions, appearing in public only to cheer on the Watford Football Club, an English soccer team that he later purchased. Many speculated that John's retreat from stardom was prompted by adverse reaction to his 1976 admission in Rolling Stone that he was bisexual. In 1983, Elton recorded a version of I Guess That's Why They Call It the Blues, featuring Stevie Wonder on harmonica. Elton had his biggest hit since 1980, and while his latest music couldn't match his 70s success, he would continue to place in the top 10 throughout the 80s.
On the heels of his success with Don't Go Breaking My Heart in the late 70s, Elton was very open in an interview about being attracted to both men and women. This was something that shocked particularly American audiences, and people freaked out about. And it was something that nowadays isn't so uncommon to say, but in those days it was unprecedented. And he took a lot of flack for that. And it also, perhaps the flack and criticism he got for being open about his sexuality contributed to his drug and alcohol use, which was getting more intensive in the 80s.
One reason rock stars fall into addiction, and it's not just rock stars as we know, but I think it comes from the whole pressure of show business. We know now, and if you're familiar with the history of show business, that back in the era of the so-called golden Hollywood era, that the big studios gave some of their star performers uppers, speed, to keep going and or lose weight, keep the film on time on the project. And that it developed into a greater dependency than anyone had ever dreamed. We knew that the great Hollywood studios had Scott Fitzgerald and William Faulkner, keep drinking, do whatever you've got to do to keep the script coming. And that's just morphed into the record industry. I think it starts out with a pressure to not just create, as people say, I took this bourbon or this psychedelic to write a song, but to perform, to get on stage and conquer my fear. I'll have a few drinks or half a speed tablet, and I'll have the courage to go on stage. And the industry let that go when the money was coming in. They let that pony continue the race. But eventually there's a accounts past due. The bill comes in, and that's when all hell breaks loose. I think one reason people in the public eye can't believe that another musician or actor has a similar addiction to so many that have gone on before is because we're not in the public eye. I mean, you or I or the person watching this, we walk down the street, we are who we are. And unless someone stumbles and falls or has their zipper down or has a tomato stain down the front where they spilled something at lunch, no one's really paying much attention to us. But I think once you're in that fishbowl and everybody's staring into the fishbowl and watching you swim around, I think the pressure is so great that some people need a artificial relaxer or enhancer to keep them going. But more to the point, I think it's nice that, I think it's more than nice, I think it's wonderful that someone like Elton John speaks out at these things. One of my dear friends is a counselor at Narcotics Anonymous, and he says, it's great if I say it, but when it comes down to one of the Hollywood guys attending a meeting and saying it about getting straight, everyone sort of sits up at the meeting.
You can't help people who don't want to help themselves. I've learned that as an addict, and I'm 28 years clean and sober. When people told me, when I was using, that I was doing the wrong thing, I was so angry, and I just told them to go away, or actually stronger language than that. So I understand George's, when I said a couple of things, and he did a whole-page interview in Heat magazine saying I should shut up, and I understood what his reaction is. Addiction is a horrible thing. And 2 or 3 of our friends are mired in addiction at the moment. And there's nothing I've learned. There's nothing you can do till you actually say, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I need help. It's the same with people who are HIV positive. Once they know their status, and that's what we're doing with this program in Africa, with Debbie Burks and us, we'll be talking about later, then it will empower young men to be able to say, okay, we'll get tested and we'll stop the infection rate of young women going up like that. So, there's always some problem or other, but there's always a solution. There's always a bright light on the horizon.
The 80s were years of personal turmoil for Elton John. In 1984, he surprised many by marrying studio engineer Renata Blauel.
Of course, there's Elton's early marriage to Renata. Now, this is something that I personally have never completely understood, but I'm hoping that in his autobiography, he delves into more detail as to why he felt compelled to marry a woman, and was it a sexual love relationship, or was it something to kind of dampen the criticism he was getting for being openly bisexual?
While the marriage lasted 4 years, John later maintained he had realized that he was gay before the marriage. In 1986, he lost his voice while touring Australia, and shortly thereafter underwent throat surgery. John continued recording prolifically, but years of cocaine and alcohol abuse were beginning to take their toll. In 1988, John performed 5 sold-out shows at New York's Madison Square Garden. His final concert, his 26th, breaking the Grateful Dead's career record of 25 sold-out Garden appearances. In later interviews, he deemed 1989 the worst period of his life, comparing his mental and physical deterioration to Elvis Presley's last years.
I've been given a second chance at living a decent life. I made a complete hash of the first one, and I think the chance I've been given again, not many people get that in life. Plus the fact I had everything in my life that I had to be grateful for. I had everything that anybody wanted except personal happiness. To do that, I had to reach the bottom of the depths of my soul and then find myself again. And I came out of it unscathed. which is a miracle, really, considering the positions and situations that I got myself into, and how far my drug abuse took me. And getting a second chance is pretty damn special for me. Because when you're a drug addict, you're so irresponsible. You don't turn up for anything. You cancel things like that. You're just not a rational human being. You know, the more sober I get and the more comfortable within my own skin, I think addiction is about running away from all the stuff that I suffered as a kid, and you know, and I just ran away from it and buried myself in a Coke spoon or food or whatever. And now I'm comfortable. I don't mind. I'm proud of who I am. I don't think it's a big deal for someone in the entertainment business, really. It's a big deal for someone who lives in a small town. But it's not a big deal, I don't think, if you're an artistic person. A lot of artistic people are gay. Come on. Hey. Am I in love right now? Very much in love. Yes, I am. Am I excited about the Grammys? I've never been to the Grammys. I've never had a Grammy. I won one for Best Group with Stevie Wonder. So, yes, it's very nice. Everything seems to be happening at the moment for me. So, yeah. Who am I in love with? That's my personal life. The thing that makes me happy now is that I've said it before, but I think I'm a reliable human being, that I turn up on time, that I have a conscience, that my family can speak to me when I'm actually compos mentis. Aside from the work things in my life that are fabulous, my own personal life has sorted itself out, and that makes me happier than anything.
Elton spent a lot of time touring, running around the world, and at one stage he decided to kind of slow down. So at his house in Windsor, he decided to throw a dinner party, and he rang up a friend and said, "Can you bring around some new people for a dinner party tonight at my house?" And his friend brought David Furnish, and Elton said from the very beginning he was impressed by him. David was rather shy. We know he's very handsome. He was kind of a serious guy, and Elton and David had enough of a conversation that enabled Elton to ask him out on a date. They went to dinner shortly after, and the rest, as they say, is history. Elton and David have had their ups and downs, most certainly, and I fully expect in Elton's autobiography that he'll be open and candid about some of those. But the fact is, the pair have managed to stay together for more than 2 decades, and now raising 2 beautiful boys together.
The year 1997 was significant for John both personally and professionally. He lost 2 close friends, designer Gianni Versace and Princess Diana. Upon Diana's death, Bernie Taupin reworked the lyrics of Candle in the Wind, a song originally written about Marilyn Monroe in 1973.
In 1997, when Princess Diana tragically died, Elton John very famously played at her funeral. Candle in the Wind, which was originally written about Marilyn Monroe, was a very beautiful, moving tribute to this incredible woman. It was said that during the song, both William and Harry, her boys, were quite emotional and teary, but they had enough respect and sense not to put the camera on them. The camera remained on Elton John during the song, but it was one of the most moving moments of the day. Elton John and Princess Diana did have a friendship, and it was a beautiful, fitting tribute to her, a woman who was very royal but also had close ties with celebrities and Hollywood.
And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will.
My father, of all people, made the point that Bing Crosby's White Christmas was the biggest hit ever because it was the right song at the right time. He said the reason it was such a hit is the soldiers in the Pacific, where it was hot and sweaty, couldn't get enough of it because many of them were from Minnesota, Iowa, upstate New York, where there was going to be a white Christmas without them while they're in the Pacific risking their lives against the Japanese forces. Right song, right time. Another example of right song, right time, the second classic example after that one is Candle in the Wind. Elton John has always been drawn, for whatever reason, it's not for me to say, to public figures who've shown some of the same foibles and vulnerability that he, Elton John, has shown in the past. I don't know why, it's not for me to say, whether he's just a good Samaritan, whether he wants to be in on the A team, and it proves to himself that he's a member of the club. But when he loses someone, when someone's lost in the public specter, Elton John is frequently called upon to say a few words because he knew them or whatever. And the classic example of right song, right time is recasting Candle as the Wind away from the Marilyn Monroe metaphor and imagery of the early original song to Lady Diana. It's a simple move, but a brilliant one. People can understand it. Lady Diana and her comments about maybe I'll be the princess of people's hearts then, that really touched a lot of people around the world. Think of all the housewives or unrequited love that exists in the world and that saw a little of themselves in the pickle that Lady Diana got into. Elton John probably would have identified with that. Is that would anybody that has a wounded or a bruised or a broken heart at some time of their life? And recasting that song for Lady Diana was the perfect song for the perfect time. People could understand what he was singing about and understand the pathos and understand the pain and understand the metaphor.
Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. Goodbye, English road, from a country lost without your soul, who missed the wings of your compassion more than you will ever know.
Elton's very famous tribute to Princess Diana at her funeral was the beginning of rather close connection with the current royal family. It meant a lot to Diana's boys, I think, that very famous Candle in the Wind performance, and such that Elton has stayed in touch with William and Harry. Elton attended William and Kate's wedding, he attended Harry and Meghan's wedding, and even performed at Harry and Meghan's reception. Elton has become like an uncle, I think, to those boys. And as one of Princess Diana's close friends, I think that his a relationship with him became even more important for her sons. Elton has now very close ties with William and Harry because of his very famous tribute to their mother.
In 1988, he was deeply affected by the plight of Ryan White, an Indiana teenager with AIDS. Along with Michael Jackson, John befriended and supported the boy and his family until White's death in 1990.
You know, a guy like Elton John knows the lay of the land in terms of popularity and the power that he has as a spokesperson for this or that, his fame and show business, to know that he wasn't going to get any sympathy from Ronald Reagan straight away. So when the AIDS epidemic came out, homophobia, Ryan White, the whole thing, he did a wonderful thing, Elton John, and he or his advisors or somebody thought, hang on, Reagan and Mrs. Reagan were both in movies. They're also both parents. There has to be a way that you can get in there to speak your piece, to say what you have to say. And the focus was put on Mrs. Reagan as a mother. She'd been an actor, of course, herself. That's how she met Ronald Reagan. So Elton John got in to see Nancy Reagan first, and speaking his piece with Mrs. Reagan about AIDS, Ryan White, about homophobia, and the whole tenor of the country back then. As rough as it is now, it's so much better than it was back in the 1980s. There's so much more understanding it's not true. And that was a wise move for Elton John to make, because he moved the whole conversation not so much forward, but out into the open. I mean, talking about AIDS or HIV back in the day, hardly anybody knew what they were talking about. It was almost like, I would say it was analogous to talking about the plague back in the Middle Ages, talking about the Black Death, that kind of thing. And when Elton John brought it to the public consciousness, not the public consciousness, that's the wrong way to put it, but he put the whole subject right in the arena and said, here it is, we've got to discuss this in the open, brought it out of the dark. He did the country a favor, and I must say, Mrs. Reagan played a role there too, because without her influence, I don't ever think they'd gotten Reagan to make the first sympathetic comment. But as we know, show business has, broadly speaking here, been more embracing or at least understanding of homosexuality than other vocations in the United States or around the world. So Elton John did a great thing. When he went to Nancy Reagan first, we have a problem here. Can I speak to you you're a mother? You understand that show business has embraced so many different kinds of people. Why can't society as a whole? That may be in some ways his crowning achievement. Who knows?
In 1992, he established the Elton John AIDS Foundation, intending to direct 90% of the funds it raised to direct care and 10% to AIDS prevention education. He also announced his intention to donate all future royalties from sales of his singles in the United States and UK to AIDS research.
We were finding that men between the ages of 24 and 35 weren't getting tested. And obviously we're infecting a lot of women. And we saw a huge jump and women's HIV rate going through the roof. And after we were in Durban, weren't we? And we were sitting in our suite with Ndaba Mandela, Nelson Mandela's grandson. And he said, you know, I come from a generation of men that don't really get tested.
And he also said the disease isn't relevant to my generation, which for Elton and me was a bit of a eureka moment because it's been so prevalent in our lives. But he said to the younger African man, he said it carries all of this baggage from where it's come from and all the stigma associated with what HIV meant in the 80s and the 90s. And we needed to kind of reposition it in a way that, you know, knowing your status and understanding your status was something to own with pride and with a sense of responsibility.
It's so frustrating because here we sit in Amsterdam. You've been to a lot of these things. And every 2 years we come here and we make a lot of progress and people are getting more treatment and getting, you know, having a healthier life. But not enough is changing in the fact that not enough people are getting the drugs. The drugs are too expensive in the case of PrEP, and also governments being homophobic, sending people underground, and the marginalized people in life are getting left behind. And of course, our organization has always said no one gets left behind. So you come across this stigma. I'm sitting up there today and doing the Q&A and thinking, this is ridiculous. We have the drugs to stop this disease now. And all it takes is for Putin, Trump, Merkel, Macron, Trudeau to say, okay, the president of China, to say, right, let's do one great humanitarian thing. Let's just end this disease. They can do it like that. President Trump has the ability to say, I want to keep PrEP going, and I want to be the president that ended AIDS. And if he said that, I would back him up to the hilt. And I don't care what he called it. He can call it Trump fire, he can do whatever he does. But he has the ability to say, my predecessors, Republican predecessor was President George Bush. He instigated this PrEP fire. And it was a bipartisan thing. Then the Obamas took it for 8 years, and it continued. It's still continuing. But he has the ability to say, it will continue, and I can have the ability to become the president that ended AIDS.
Elton is one of the most wealthy artists today, and it's not just because of his incredible work ethic and his constant touring, but it's also because he's a great songwriter. So he's constantly getting residuals from a musical like The Lion King, which he wrote, or Billy Elliot, which he wrote, or any number of songs that he's written. So he's getting paid whether he gets on stage or not. Elton has also had a very lucrative residency in Las Vegas. He's written songs for any number of television and ads and all kinds of programs. The John Lewis ad, I think he was paid something around $5 million for that. So Elton John is incredibly wealthy. He's also a very big spender, and I think his lifestyle very much so matches his worth. Having said that, Elton has done an incredible amount to raise money for charity. He may be one of the richest living artists, but he's also one of the most generous. His Elton John AIDS Foundation has done incredible work, has done a tremendous amount of fundraising, has really done a phenomenal amount for AIDS, for research, and for help, and for looking for a cure. Elton was very influenced to start his AIDS Foundation by his friendship with a young boy called Ryan White. Ryan had been infected with AIDS from a blood transfusion. And it was Elton's friendship with Ryan and kind of introduction to him that impacted him greatly for the rest of his life. It led to Elton's creation of the AIDS Foundation and millions and millions and millions of money that he's personally donated and raised to help fight AIDS.
And in a place like Russia, Elton will make a statement from the stage where he will talk about the spirit in which he is received and the spirit in which he is welcomed. And, you know, having gone to Russia since 1979 and being greeted with open arms, he says, look, I'm an openly gay man. You've accepted me, you've accepted, you know, my music. You need to put that same spirit into your everyday lives. And when you go outside the walls of the stadium and when you interact with people, you know, let that whole spirit run through your day-to-day activities.
It's a thing as a musician that you can break down barriers like that. It's like being a sportsman or a musician seems to be able to bring people together. It's a common denominator.
But it's better to go and give the issue visibility and to give it humanity than it is to boycott and stay at home. That doesn't help anybody on the ground there. And when we meet with the local people in Russia from the different LGBT groups, they say, please, don't isolate us. That's exactly what they want. They want to push us into the shadows. They want to push us away. They want us to be forgotten about. If you come, you'll be embraced, you know, in a big, high-profile way, and you will keep the issue and the fact that we're still here and that we need to be treated with dignity, you know, very much alive.
And they need to know they're supported.
Another issue where we need to address stigma and address humanity is in how we put our arms around people that are dealing with addiction, in the same way that we need to do that for people living with HIV/AIDS.
I was at an event in New York a few years back, and it was a private party for very big fundraisers and donors for charity. And Elton was giving a private performance, and I was literally maybe 3 feet away from him, and there were maybe only about 100 people in the room. So it was a very quiet, intimate gathering, and he had a piano on stage. And it felt like we were at someone's house party, and Elton was the guy who sat down at the piano and was playing for the guests. And, you know, when you see him in person, he's not intimidating or imposing. He reminded me of Madonna, actually, because she's quite little and tiny when you meet Madonna. And he's not like this big star power, scary celebrity. He just seems like a guy who's normal. But when he sits down to play and starts to sing and you hear those very famous notes and songs that you know and his incredible voice, he becomes electric. He becomes bigger than life. And I think with the celebrities I've met who are truly iconic performers, something magical happens to them when they start to act or when they start to sing or whatever it is that they do. And they become bigger than themselves and they become impossible to look away from. And I found his performance compelling and riveting, exceptional, fantastical. And the reason was that for whatever else you want to say about Elton John, he is a genius at what he does.
Elton John married his longtime life partner, David Furnish, in a civil ceremony on December 21st, 2005, the same day the Civil Partnership Act of 2004 went into effect. 9 years after their civil ceremony on December 21, 2014, the couple wed after laws allowing gay marriage took effect the same year in Britain.
Elton John has not that long ago come off of like 200 shows in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace. He is like 70 years old playing every night. This is a grueling, grueling schedule. We know people like Britney Spears, Jennifer Lopez, Celine Dion have all had residencies in Vegas. And they're very lucrative. You make millions and millions and you don't have to travel. You don't have to go on tour. There's no tour buses you can buy or rent some big mansion in Las Vegas. And all you have to do is show up on the same stage night after night after night. A lot of people can't figure out why Elton is still going. Why doesn't he just retire, kick back, you know, enjoy life? Having said that, Elton John has been very vocal recently about the fact that he is retiring. He is finally stopping. He wants to just be with his kids, his 2 little boys, Zachary and Elijah, and they are his world. Elton has said very openly, he's coming up to 72, that he just wants to be a dad and being with his kids is more important than any tour and any date. And he's finally ready to just relax. He's giving himself permission to retire.
My big announcement was that I'm going to do one more final global tour, and that will be the end of me touring. I've had a most amazing career. I've had every award, every accolade possible. And, you know, you have to say, enough's enough, and what's the most important thing in one's life now? And it's the children. They've changed our lives. And I don't want to selfishly bang on and be away from them. That would break my heart. It breaks my heart going away from them anyway. And they get upset when I go. And no, this is something I'm so looking forward to. It's another chapter of my amazing life.
So Elton John has said he's winding it down. He doesn't want to do any more touring, and more power to him. He's certainly, if anyone's earned a few moments with their feet up by the fire and a refreshing drink in hand, it's Elton John. But I find it hard to believe that he will not do any more touring. He may not do long, extensive tours that he's done in the past, but I think he'll tread the boards. And I don't just mean a one-off with him solo or Ray Cooper on percussion. I think we'll see him out there. He'll miss it. It gets in your DNA.
You know, it's going to look amazing. We've already thought of the set list because you have to start doing, you know, the things for each number. This has been going for 18 months and leading up to today's announcement. I want them to have a celebration because they've been so amazing to me, and I think I've always delivered to them. And I just want it to be, you know, this is your final chance to see me. We're going to have a big party, and you're going to go away thinking you've seen something very special. I don't do a tour every 3 years. I'm always on the road. I've never done a tour, a proper tour like this. This idea kind of came about in 2015 when the boys were beginning to start school. And up to that point, we'd taken them around the world because they were very portable. But when they have a school schedule coming up and then everything's planned about half terms and holidays, and David said, well, you know, what's going to happen, you know, and are you going to go on forever? And I said, no, I don't want to go on forever. So playing live is the greatest thrill of my life because you never know what to expect. You never know how you're going to play. You never know if it's going to be really magic for you or it's going to be just okay, which the audience won't notice. But an artist knows when, you know, sometimes you are not feeling great. You go on stage and everything falls into place and it's sensational. You don't know. It's like an actor going and saying, you don't know how you're going to perform, and that's why you love to play live, because it's the uncertainty of the result and the connection with the human being. And that's something I probably will miss, is that connection with an audience. But I've had enough. I've done over 4,000 shows. I can survive on those memories.
So the biopic starring Taron Egerton is phenomenal, and it is something that Bohemian Rhapsody, which of course we know won 4 Oscars and made millions of dollars. Unlike Rami Malek in Bohemian Rhapsody, Taron Egerton actually can sing live, and beautifully so. So one of the advantages Rocketman has is that we've got this kind of raw, live voice singing performance. The other thing is, I think Bohemian Rhapsody tried to appeal so much to the masses that it's been criticized that it downplayed some of Freddie Mercury's sexuality and drug use. Whereas Rocketman doesn't gloss over the sexual life or the drug use of Elton John in his own life. It's an honest, not always flattering portrayal of the guy who it's about. Now, David Furnish, Elton's husband, is one of the producers of Rocketman, and it was important to him to present the true story, the real story, even if it wasn't always complimentary, because ultimately he loves Elton for who he really is.
If Elton John can admit to these failings, then maybe he can save somebody out there from getting into those failings in the first place.
Elton John's autobiography is entitled Me, and Elton John has promised to present a very accurate, unflinching, controversial look at himself. His publisher is already saying he has no doubt it's going to be the memoir of the decade. Whereas a lot of celebrities oftentimes write their memoirs in a way that's very flattering to themselves and leaves out huge portions of their lives, which were like car crashes. Elton John is unflinching in his documentation of his failures and his addictions. Elton John's autobiography is promising to be be incredibly interesting at the very least, because we know that Elton is a mercurial personality.
Because as much as I have been a very famous person, I think I'm also quite grounded in a way, and I don't really talk about my success a lot. And certainly I don't bring it home. And it was just lovely to think, God, what an amazing life I've had. And it's still continuing.
Elton's legacy is his genius as a songwriter. The songs that Elton John has written, anyone in the entire world knows at least 2 or 3 of them. We all know the tunes, we all know some of the words, the crazy lyrics to some of them, and he's a genius. He is a musical genius. And nowadays there's so few left that we would say that are truly iconic. Elton John is one of the few that are still standing.
I think Elton John, when all is said and done, his legacy won't be all the records sold. There's a number of people, and they may only be 10 or 12, but have sold a lot of records up in the rarefied air, the stratosphere that Elton John's in. But when Elton John stuck his neck out for HIV and AIDS and said, we've got to discuss these things, we've got to be open about them, that's a little more special. When Elton John reaches out to someone who is famous or not famous, as he's done in the past, and said, you're falling by the wayside with some kind of addiction or depression or eating disorder that I've had, and if I can overcome it, you can overcome it. That's a really great legacy to have. That would probably mean more than I sold 470, jillion records. When he knocks on the pearly gates, that's probably what's going to get him inside. I don't think St. Peter's going to be all that impressed with multi-platinum albums. But if he says, I helped decrease some of the ugliness against homosexuality, some of the darkness there. I helped in a small way for the public, certainly in the United States, to understand what AIDS is. I helped on occasion, but noted occasions, my fellow man rise back up to his feet when that man or woman had stumbled down to their knees. That is what's going to impress St. Peter. And at the end of the day, that's what impresses me.
It's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. I'm not one of those who can easily hide. I don't have much money, but boy, if I did, I'd buy a big house where we both could live.